Our next topic is called planing. Sometimes this is called using parallel chords. And there are two different kinds of planing. This is a technique that's often used by Debussy and was quite influential in other music that followed. The first type we'll talk about is called diatonic. And in diatonic planing, the chord progression stays within a key. So for example, here in the key of C, I start with a C triad and acknowledge that it is in the quality of a major triad. Of course, with a major triad, there are two intervals of the third, the major third and the minor third. But what's important in planing is the melody, because the chord progression will follow the melody. In fact, it's the melody that determines the chord progression. This is not functional harmony. This is melody and harmony that's just flowing together in a sort of parallel way. So here the melody goes up to A, and then C, and down to B, and down to G, and we're going to reflect that same shape in the chords. So as the melody goes up a step, my chords will all go up a step. Each note of the triad will go up a step. And here, where the melody goes up a third, the pitches of the triad go up a third and keep their same basic structure. Here, where the melody goes down a second, the chord goes down a second. And finally, here, where the melody goes down a third, the chord goes down a third. Now, what do you have to keep in mind if you do this diatonically, that is, stay within the key signature or within the key or mode of the melody, then the chords will actually change in structure. In other words, those thirds will change. In a C major triad, it's a major third and a minor third, but moving up to the D, it becomes a minor third and a major third. In other words, it's a minor triad. We already know this because when we build chords in a particular key, even though they seem as though they're the same structure, all built in thirds, depending on which pitch level, which scale degree the chords are built on, they will be different in quality. So it's just the basic interval and the basic intervallic shape that stays the same. Let's take a look at a slightly more difficult example. In this piece, we're going to start in the key of D major in 4/4 time, and we'll build a melody starting on the pitch F sharp. Remember, with diatonic planing, actually with any kind of planing, the melody is what determines the chord progression. So whatever the melody does, if it goes up a step or if it goes down a step, or here in this case jump up a third, then we're going to make sure that when we write the chords that they're going to follow the exact same shape as the melody. Of course, this results in lots of parallel intervals, and in the common practice period that would be a mistake to use, for example, parallel fifths or parallel octaves. But in this kind of harmonization, we're not concerned at all with parallel intervals. It's part of the style. Here we're going to invent a chord structure for the first chord. The composer gets to invent the structure. In this case, I'm going to invent a structure here, well, not invent, but just use a structure here that is a major 7 chord, a major triad with a major 7th involved in it. I'm going to look at the intervals. There's a fifth, and then there's a third, and then there's a second, and then there's a third. I'm going to make sure to keep that same structure for each chord. The melody goes up a step, so each note of the voicing is also moving up a step. The lowest note, the middle notes, take them one at a time and move them up a step from where they were. Likewise, going to the next chord goes up a step. So again, my pitches all go up a step. I keep my pitches within whatever the key signature or whatever the key or mode that I'm using at the moment. Here, the melody is going up a third, so notice, starting with the bass, I'm moving each of the pitches up a third. Here, these two middle voices, the E and the F sharp, are going to go up to G and A. And the next chord goes down a step, so all of my voices go down a step. If you think of it this way, as just tracking those intervals, it's really not difficult at all to write diatonic planing. Let's give it a listen to see what this sounds like. Now, when we go back to look at the chords that we've written, we notice that the first chord is a D chord with a major 7 quality. The second chord is an E minor 7. The third is F sharp minor 7. The next one is an A dominant 7th, a major minor 7 quality. And the next chord is a G major 7 chord, and the last is an E minor 7. Now, it should not surprise us that each of these chord qualities are different, because that is the nature of writing chords in a diatonic context. We're going to take a look here at a piece called Toccatina by Kabalevsky. And this is a very good example of diatonic planing. We see at the very beginning of the piece that we have a minor triad that Kabalevsky uses. And the first melodic pitch is an A. He sets up the structure of the chord, and then he'll move to the second chord following the melody. The melody moves up to C, and so all of the other voices also move up in the same direction and by the same general interval. In other words, the melody moves up a third. The other voices of the triad also will move up a third. The resultant harmony is a C major triad. Then going into the next measure, as the C goes down to B, going down a second, all of the other pitches of the triad move down as well. But notice that the resultant chord quality is diminished. Again, this doesn't surprise us, because when we build chords diatonically, we've learned over and over again that the triads are different in quality depending on the scale degree. In this example by Debussy, the Soirée dans Grenade, we have an excellent example of diatonic planing. Notice the key signature is 6 sharps, like the key of F sharp major, except it's a little bit more modal in the way that the piece is written. The first chord we're looking at is actually a G sharp minor triad written in first inversion. And you can look at the structure of the way the voicing is built, because we're going to keep those intervallic spacings the same as it goes through this passage. Notice that the melody goes up by a step, and so the second chord of this passage, each note of that voicing goes up a step. And likewise, as we trace through this entire little passage, as the melody goes a particular way, and then the next chord, the melody goes up a step again, all the chords trace going up a step, and then the melody goes down a third, and all the voices go down a third. A very typical example of diatonic planing for Debussy. The next concept we want to look at is what is called strict planing. This is a bit different. So in strict planing, we start again with our initial triad, and this can be whatever the composer chooses. Here I'm choosing something simple. This is a C major triad, and I've got the melody, and of course the melody will determine the chord progression. So as the melody goes up, the chord will go up. The difference here is that the intervallic structure and the intervallic motion is strict. It is not diatonic. So if the melody goes up a major second, then every pitch within that triad will go up a major second. So you can see that that will necessitate an F sharp here. The other result is that each chord quality will be exactly the same. So if the first chord quality is major, the second chord quality will also be major. You can see that the intervals are exactly the same. When we go up to this next chord, we can see that the melody is actually moving up a minor third. So we move all of the pitches in the chord structure up a minor third. The result in this case will be an F major triad, and the intervallic structure will be exactly the same as the first two chords. Watch when the melody goes down a half step now from C to B. Each pitch will move down a half step. You can see that will necessitate a G sharp in this chord. The result is that the harmony here will also be major in quality. And finally, we move down to the original chord. This strict type of progression is a very unusual sound that pulls our ears through a series of chords that are consistent in quality, but that really conflict with the diatonic nature of the melody. Now let's try an example that's a little bit more difficult. Here we'll start in the key of B minor, and my first melody pitch will be F sharp. And here are the notes of the melody. Remember, it's the melody in planing that determines the chord progression. But the composer certainly picks the very first chord, and here I'm going to pick a B minor 7 chord. So that chord is B, D, F sharp, and A, and its structure is minor 7. Remember, in strict planing, the structure of the chord will remain absolutely consistent from one chord to the next. So my intervals, in this case a minor 7th, and then a perfect 4th, and then a major 3rd, that structure has to be exactly consistent. The easiest way to do this is just analyze what the melody does. In this case, the melody goes up 1/2 step. So each of the chord tones in that chord voicing are also going to move up a 1/2 step. So the B goes to C natural, the A goes to B flat, the D goes to E flat. The result will be that that second chord is also a minor 7 chord, in that case a C minor 7 chord. Going to the third chord, we can see the melody goes up a whole step. So each pitch in each voice will also go up a whole step. The C will go to D, the B flat will go to C natural, the E flat goes to F natural. Notice in doing strict planing, there are going to be lots of accidentals, because to keep those intervals consistent, you're going to be pulled out of the key. Notice all the intervals are consistent, all the chords are minor 7. We know that's not true in diatonic music, that all the chord qualities would be exactly the same. But in strict planing, it is true. In the next chord, you can see the melody goes up a major 3rd, so all the pitches go up a major 3rd. Then the melody goes down a major 2nd, so all the pitches go down a major 2nd. And in the last chord, the melody goes down a major 3rd, so all the pitches go down a major 3rd. In strict planing, you have to be extremely careful with your intervals to keep them consistent. And finally, here's a piece of music by Debussy. This is called Soirée en Grenade, which is a sort of a night party in Granada. And the very first chord sets up for Debussy what will be an an extended progression over 4 measures of strict planing. We need to look at the very first chord structure. We're in the key of C sharp minor, although he writes it as a C sharp dominant chord. He adds the E sharp. This is important because this is a major minor 7th quality. And if that's the case, in strict planing, all the chords will have to be major minor 7 in quality. We can see that the melody note initially goes up from a C sharp to a D. That's a half-step motion. And in that case, all of the notes then have to go up a half step. The B will have to go to C natural. We'll have to apply the accidental. The E sharp will go up to F sharp. The C sharp will go to D. The G sharp will go to A. The C sharp goes to D. And the result is a D major minor 7 chord. As you trace this melody, the very last chord in the measure, you can see the D of the melody going up to E. Again, take note of the interval. The interval is a whole step. Therefore, all the notes of that chord are moving up a whole step. And if accidentals need to be applied, then they're applied. Every chord in this example is a major minor 7 chord in quality. Let's give it a listen to hear this sort of unusual effect of strict planing.